back at Parkland Hospital to talk about the events of what happened after the president was pronounced dead. This is a really interesting story, I'll tell you. So, President Kennedy has been pronounced dead. They've covered him up with a sheet. He's been given the last rites of the Catholic Church. And now the topic of discussion comes to the autopsy. When someone's killed, you do an autopsy. Well, according to Texas state law, the autopsy had to be performed in Dallas. Okay? That was what the big controversy is going to be next. Is that because the president was killed in Texas, the autopsy had to be done in Texas. So the plan was that they would do the autopsy. And the man that was insisting that the autopsy be done in Texas by Texas law was Dallas medical examiner Dr. Earl Rose. He was adamant to the Kennedy camp that the president's autopsy would have to be done in Dallas because Texas state law said that if you're killed in Texas, the autopsy's done in Texas.
Is that true with any state?
Pretty much, yeah. So since President Kennedy was killed in Dallas, Texas state law required the president's autopsy to be done in Dallas by civilian doctors. And as a result, Dallas medical examiner Dr. Earl Rose insisted that the autopsy be done in Dallas. Well, the Kennedy camp was having no part of that. They planned to take the president's body from Parkland Hospital and take it back to Washington, D.C. for autopsy. They did not want any part of Texas anymore. They were sick of Texas. And the Kennedy camp made it real clear that they were not staying in Dallas and they were taking the president's body back to Washington, D.C. Now, the man that was most boisterous about this, about the president going back to D.C., was Roy Kellerman. Remember, he was the head of the Secret Service detail in Dallas. And he was the one that was very, very livid that we are not staying here for an autopsy. We are going to take the president back to Washington, D.C. He was the guy that was very boisterous in that. Now, conspiracy theorists will tell you that he did that because they wanted to botch up the autopsy and ruin evidence so we didn't know what happened. Well, there were three specific reasons why Kellerman wanted the president back in Washington. Roy Kellerman, yeah. He was one of the guys in the limousine that drove the president. He wanted him back in Washington. There's three reasons why he was willing to break the law to get the president back to Washington. So conspiracy theorists will tell you because, you know, they're covering something up. That's not true. This is why Kellerman wanted him back. Number one, it kind of goes in order. He believed strongly that they needed to get Vice President Johnson back to Washington, D.C. for security reasons. He's going to become the next president of the United States. He has a job to protect the presidency, no matter who it is. And so the first reason that he wanted the president's body back was because he wanted Lyndon Johnson back because he wanted to protect him. Now you're thinking, well, what does that have to do with anything? The president's body staying for an autopsy and getting Lyndon Johnson back. Well, Vice President Johnson was not leaving Dallas unless Mrs. Kennedy went also. And Mrs. Kennedy was not leaving without what? Her husband's body. So those are the three reasons. So Agent Kellerman, number one, strongly believed that Vice President Johnson must be taken back to Washington, D.C. immediately for security reasons. Johnson made it clear, I am not going back to D.C. without Mrs. Kennedy. And Mrs. Kennedy made it real clear, I'm not going back to D.C. without my husband's body. They weren't sticking around for an autopsy. Does that make sense? So that was the big controversy. Dr. Earl Rose insisted the autopsy be done in Dallas. Kellerman said, no way, because I'm getting Vice President Johnson back to D.C. And Lyndon Johnson said, well, I'm not going back to D.C. unless I have Mrs. Kennedy with me. And Mrs. Kennedy says, I'm not going back to D.C. without my husband's body. Boy, it'd be at least 24 hours or longer. And they weren't, I mean, think about what they've been through. What are they going to do for 24 hours? You know, they don't have any interest. They want to get the hell out of here. Matter of fact, Kenneth O'Donnell said, this is kind of not very good language, but his comment was, when he spoke about it, he looked around, he says, what a shitty place to die. That's what he said. And they wanted out of there. They wanted out of Texas. Here's what Dr. Rose was later quoted as saying about these events. He said, "I was in their way. I was face to face with Secret Service agent Roy Kellerman, and I was trying to explain to him that Texas law applied in the instant case of the death of the president, and that the law required an autopsy to be performed in Texas. No one was in charge of the situation. Agent Kellerman tried 3 tactics to have his way. He asserted his identity as representing the Secret Service. He appealed for sympathy to Mrs. Kennedy, and he used body language to attempt to bully, or should I say intimidate. At no time did I feel I was in physical danger because he and the others were armed. I was not looking at Agent Kellerman's gun, I was looking at his eyes, and they were very intense. His eyes said he meant to get the president's body back to Washington." Now this disagreement between Kellerman and Rose got so heated they were swearing. Dallas police were pulling guns, Secret Service agents were pulling guns, and this whole mess was right in front of who? Mrs. Kennedy. It was a nightmare. These guys were arguing back and forth, swearing at each other. One guy pulled a gun, the next guy pulled a gun. Mrs. Kennedy's, you got to be just thinking, you got to be kidding me. So who steps in and tries to get this under control? Our old friend, what do you say? I think you were right. Kenneth O'Donnell. Your old friend Kenneth O'Donnell steps in to try to make a proposal because he can see this is getting crazy. Okay? And he doesn't want to be there any more than anybody else, but he can see there's an issue here. So what O'Donnell does, he steps in, he says, "Hey, if you're concerned about the autopsy and how it's going to be done, make sure it's done right. We'll do this. We'll take Admiral George Berkeley," which is, I just did this yesterday, right here, this guy right here. We'll take George Berkeley. He's an admiral in the Navy, and he was the president's personal physician during the time of his presidency, and we'll promise you that Admiral Berkey will stay with the president's body the whole time until we get back and arrange an autopsy in Washington. So Kenneth O'Donnell can see this is going south. So he says, wait a minute, let's compromise here. I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll make Admiral George Berkeley, who was the president's personal physician that was there, we will have him stay with the body the entire time, from the time we leave the hospital till we get on Air Force One, till we get back to D.C., and he'll accompany the body to wherever we take it for autopsy. That was his proposal. Well, when it looked like both sides agreed to this proposal, because they really didn't, O'Donnell then asked Agent Clint Hill to obtain a casket for the president, because they were going to transport him out in a casket, obviously. So after O'Donnell proposed that, and he thought they had some sort of agreement, he then said to Secret Service agent Clint Hill, "Let's secure a casket to transport the president's body." So Hill called a local mortuary, and he asked them to deliver the best casket they had immediately to Parkland Hospital. So again, after it seems they have an agreement with the Berkeley situation, Kenneth O'Donnell asked Secret Service agent Clint Hill to obtain a casket. He calls a local mortuary, and he tells him to deliver the best casket available to Parkland immediately. Well, once Vice President Johnson was assured that they were taking the president's body back to Love Field to put on the airplane to go to D.C., then he departed Parkland under the protection of Secret Service. But again, he wasn't leaving until he knew the president's body was going, because he knew Mrs. Kennedy was not leaving without that body. So when they assured him that a deal had been made and they were making arrangements to take the president's body to Love Field and put it on Air Force One for the trip back to D.C., then Johnson officially departed Parkland Hospital under Secret Service protection. Well, the casket arrives, the president's body is placed in the casket, and despite O'Donnell's proposal, controversy continues. And they basically have to force this casket out of the hospital and into the hearse to take it to Love Field. Dr. Rose is still protesting, actually standing in the way as they try to move the casket out, to the point where they tell him to get the hell out of the way or we're going to run over you. I mean, it was that bad. That wasn't, he was that's a good question. He says, why didn't Earl Rose just go back to DC with him? He was a stubborn guy. That's not how Texas law works. He wasn't going to compromise his integrity in the law. He knew these guys were breaking the law, and they actually were, okay? But I mean, he to the end protested this and actually even kind of stood in the way of the casket as they were rolling it out. Well, finally at 2:08 p.m., and kids, this is weird, we've been going at this a while, but we're still talking about November 22nd, 1963. At 2:08 p.m., the casket was loaded into a hearse outside Parkland Hospital and took off for Love Field. 2:08. So, I mean, this was just a mess. Quite a controversy. And I'm going to show you a video when we're all done with this to end this called Parkland. And you'll get to see all this, how it happened. Okay, that'll take us to our next subtopic then, which is departure back to Washington, D.C. We're going to tell you what happens from the time the president's body hits Love Field till we get back to D.C. Okay? So departure back to D.C. What time did they leave Parkland? They arrived at Love Field at 2:14. Okay? That didn't take them long to get there. 2:14 p.m. The hearse that was carrying the president's body arrived at Love Field at 2:14. Now, what's your next decision? Think about this. It's been emotional all day. You pull up in the hearse. There's the airplane ready to get on. What's your next decision? If you're the Secret Service or Kenneth O'Donnell or anybody that's close to the president. What's that? Well, that didn't matter. They were just going to, but that's a good one. Where to put it? Where would you normally put something like that? What? In the cargo, right? So the next decision is going to be where are we going to place the president's casket on Air Force One? And the Secret Service had already made the decision they would not put the president's body below the aircraft, in their words, like a piece of luggage. They had already made that decision as they were driving to Love Field that they weren't putting that casket underneath like a piece of luggage. So they made this decision before they got there, and they called ahead and they actually took out 2 rows of seats out of Air Force One to make room for the president's coffin. So they actually went in there prior to his arrival and took out 2 rows of seats in Air Force One to make a spot for that casket. Now I'm going to get back to Milo. We'll talk about casket bearers. Basically, the Secret Service agents were the ones that loaded it up with some help of Kennedy aides. The problem was, when they tried to load the casket onto Air Force One through what would normally be a passenger entrance, the casket was too wide to fit through the door. Okay, and it was very, very heavy. They sent over an incredibly heavy casket. So it was very heavy, hard to lift, and it didn't fit through the doors of Air Force One. So 2 things had to happen. First of all, when they got up there and saw that it was too wide, what was making it too wide? The handles that you lifted by. So they had to break the handles off of the casket to get it to fit through the door. So the casket was too wide. The Secret Service agents were forced to break the handles of the casket so it would fit through the door. Now, what might be the next issue, because it's not used to having long, wide things come in the door? They couldn't make the turn. So, very good, baby. The next issue arose when the casket could not make the corner once it got inside the airplane. So, what they did is they basically sawed off part of the airplane entrance inside so the coffin could make the turn. So they got it inside, you go in the door, they didn't saw off the door, but if they walked in, they couldn't make the turn. They sawed off inside the door area, a whole piece, so they could make the turn. So they finally break off the handles of the coffin, they cut off part of the wall so they can make the turn, and they set the coffin down inside the airplane. Well, as soon as that airplane door shut, Kenneth O'Donnell was ready to go. I mean, he insisted that that plane take off immediately. You know why? Why is he in such a hurry to go? What did he just do, he and the boys? Broke the law. And he's convinced in his mind that the Dallas police are on their way to keep him from taking off. No, and that's what he's thinking. He says, my God, I mean, I think we have good reasons for doing this, but we just broke the law. So he says, let's get this plane off the ground before the Dallas Police Department shows up and arrests us. and takes the coffin back for autopsy. He wanted no part of that. Well, O'Donnell then turned to a general by the name of Godfrey McHugh. He was a military aide to President Kennedy. He told him, hey, let's get this dang plane off the ground. Tell him to let's go. So O'Donnell tells General Godfrey McHugh, who's a military aide to President Kennedy, let's get this plane off the ground. Let's get this plane off the ground.
No.
What?
If they would have just sworn in Johnson as president immediately, like at the hospital, then could they have avoided more of this? Because then having a sitting president rather than...
He still wanted him back to DC because they didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
not-
but I'm saying like they were breaking the law, but then like a president has the ability to pardon.
Yeah, well, maybe. I really, with the way it was crazy, it's a good point. And he's going to get sworn in before they take off, and we'll talk about that, which is an interesting story in itself, okay? But anyway, I don't know. I think if it's, they wanted to get the hell out of the hospital, I think is what they wanted to do. Well, anyway, when O'Donnell tells General McHugh, hey, let's get this plane off the ground, who does McHugh go to say, hey, let's get this plane off the ground? Who? The pilot. This guy right here. Oh, I just got over here. Right here, Jim Swindoll was the pilot. And McHugh goes to Swindoll and he says, let's get this plane off the ground. And Swindoll says, hey, I can't take off. No one's given me orders to take off yet. Who's going to give him orders to take off? It might seem weird. Possibly the president. But the president's dead, and the vice president, wonder where he's at. Now here's where it gets crazy. The reason Swindoll wouldn't take off is because, remember Associate Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff, who announced the president's death? He told Swindoll, he said, hey, don't take off yet, something's going on back there. Something's going on. So Swindoll says to McHugh, he says, well, I can't take off. Malcolm Kilduff told me something's going on, we're not ready to take off. So what does McHugh do? Yeah, he goes straight to Kilduff and says, you know, what the hell's going on here? Why aren't we taking off? So McHugh goes to Swindoll. He said, I'm not taking off because Malcolm Kilduff said there's something's going on. McHugh goes back to Malcolm Kilduff and said, basically, what's going on? How come we're not taking off? Well, General McHugh was told by Kilduff that Vice President Johnson wanted to take the oath of office before the plane took off. Okay? So that's what Malcolm Kilduff told Swindoll was going on, right? Well, I think he told me to wait, something's going on. But what was going on is Johnson was waiting to take the oath of office before the plane took off. Well, think about this trip in general. When we first came to Texas, how did Lyndon Johnson get to Texas? He flew in himself. Remember, he met President Kennedy at San Antonio. Nobody knew he was even on the airplane because they thought he would fly back in his own plane that he flew there in. So Swindoll doesn't know Johnson's on the plane. McHugh doesn't know he's on the plane. Evidently, Kilduff knows he's on the plane, right? So here's how the conversation goes. So McHugh is told that Vice President Johnson was waiting to take the oath of office, and McHugh didn't even realize the Vice President was on board. McHugh had assumed Johnson would fly back to D.C. in the aircraft that brought him to Texas those days before. So McHugh goes to Kilduff and says, hey, Lyndon Johnson's not on this plane. What are you talking about? And Kilduff looks at General McHugh and he says, well, you go tell that 6'4" Texan back there that he's not Lyndon Johnson. And General McHugh then points to the coffin in the back of the plane. He states, my president is back there in that box. So they get in a little bit of controversy because it's just one example of how tough it's going to be for the Kennedy forces to transfer their loyalties from President Kennedy to who's going to be the president, Lyndon Johnson. So McHugh's pissed off, okay? Because he doesn't consider Lyndon Johnson the president, and he doesn't even want to acknowledge he exists or is on the airplane. Well, here's where it gets a little crazy, and I just want you to kind of listen to this, and you can write down what you want. There is no question that Lyndon Johnson wanted to be sworn in before the plane left. No question. But is that stepping on toes? You know, and Mrs. Kennedy's in there. We got all these loyal Kennedy followers. So you know what Johnson did earlier? Who did he call and try to get permission to get sworn in? Who did he call to say, "God, I think I should get sworn in"? He called Robert Kennedy, because he figured if Robert Kennedy would give him his blessing, it'd be okay. He doesn't really want to offend any of the Kennedy people. We already got a volatile situation. He really doesn't want to offend Mrs. Kennedy. So if he can get Bobby Kennedy's permission, is that going to be pretty good? Really it is. Well, this is kind of interesting. Vice President Johnson asked Bobby, you know, what are the constitutional requirements for me to get sworn in here on Air Force One in Dallas? And Bobby Kennedy said, you know, I really don't know. I'll have to check on it and get back to you. So Johnson made the call, saying to Bobby, you know, what do you think we should do here? What are the constitutional requirements? Can you tell me that? Because he wanted Bobby to say it's okay. You know, he wanted that. And Bobby said he'd get back to him. Well, according to historians who have researched this, Vice President Johnson wanted the decision to be Bobby so bad, he even went back on the airplane and told the Kennedy forces, quote, Bobby wants me to take the oath in Dallas. So he told them that before Bobby ever got back to him. So did he ask Bobby if he should take the oath? No. He asked Bobby, how do I do this constitutionally? And Bobby said, I'll get back to you. Did Bobby Kennedy say, yeah, go ahead, Lyndon, I think that'll be great? You know what, I'll find out. Well, later, Robert Kennedy insisted that it was Johnson's idea to take the oath of office, not his. And when that was found out later, you can imagine how upset all these Kennedy supporters were on this airplane. Okay? But Johnson wanted to. So, according to Johnson, he received Bobby's blessing to be sworn in. Once he had that in his mind, that Bobby said it was okay, Johnson